What if the world's most critical oil artery could vanish overnight, and no one could stop it? Every single day, an invisible lifeline pulses through a narrow stretch of water that most people will never see. Yet billions unknowingly depend on it. Tankers glide silently across its surface, each one carrying enough crude oil to power entire nations. This place is not just a route, it's a pressure point, a fragile seam holding together the fabric of the global economy. At its narrowest, the Strait of Hormuz compresses this massive flow into a corridor so tight that ships must pass like threads through the eye of a needle, 2 miles wide in each direction. That's all it takes. 2 miles to sustain modern civilization as we know it. But here's the unsettling truth. This lifeline exists in one of the most politically volatile regions on Earth. Warships patrol its waters like silent guardians, not just watching but waiting. Insurance costs for tankers spike overnight at the slightest hint of tension. Crews sail knowing that one wrong move, one miscalculation, one unexpected spark could transform routine passage into international crisis. And it has happened before. Ships seized, tankers damaged, confrontations escalating within hours. The strait doesn't need to close to create chaos. The mere possibility is enough. Markets react instantly. Oil prices surge. Economies tremble. And far from this narrow waterway, ordinary people feel the consequences at fuel stations, in grocery stores, in rising costs that ripple through daily life. It's a system so tightly wound that disruption in one corner of the world echoes everywhere. And this raises a chilling possibility. What if, one day, that narrow passage becomes unusable? What if the world wakes up to find its most vital energy corridor suddenly cut off? That question has haunted strategists and engineers for decades. Because the dependence is not theoretical, it's absolute. The Persian Gulf is home to some of the most powerful energy producers on the planet, and almost all of their exports must pass through this single exit point. Pipelines have been built, alternative routes explored, contingency plans drafted, but none come close to replacing the sheer volume that flows through this corridor. It is a bottleneck in the truest sense, concentrating risk into a single vulnerable space. And for those who think ahead, who analyze worst-case scenarios, that's unacceptable. Because choke points don't just carry trade, they carry consequences. One disruption here doesn't stay local. It cascades outward, affecting currencies, industries, and entire economies. It's why militaries maintain a constant presence, why surveillance never stops, why global powers keep one eye permanently fixed on this stretch of water. But even with all this attention, one uncomfortable fact remains: there is no true backup, no parallel route capable of absorbing the shock. And that realization gave birth to an idea so ambitious, so audacious, that it feels almost unreal. What if ships didn't have to pass through the Strait of Hormuz at all? What if, instead of relying on a natural choke point shaped by geography and politics, humanity simply created a new path, a direct route, a controlled passage, a man-made solution to a natural vulnerability? On paper it sounds like the ultimate fix, a clean, elegant answer to a deeply complex problem. But reality, as always, is far more complicated. At the northern edge of Oman lies a rugged, jagged landmass that seems almost designed to challenge human ambition. The Musandam Peninsula juts into the Strait of Hormuz like a fortress carved by nature itself. Sharp cliffs rise abruptly from the sea. Deep valleys cut through the terrain. And beneath its surface lies the key to a bold idea, because in certain places, the distance between the Persian Gulf and the open waters beyond is surprisingly short. Just a few dozen miles, close enough to imagine something extraordinary. A canal, a massive artificial passage carved directly through the peninsula, allowing ships to bypass the Strait of Hormuz entirely. No choke point, no narrow corridor, no geopolitical tension dictating the flow of global energy. Tankers could move freely from the Gulf to the open ocean without ever entering contested waters. It's a vision that feels almost inevitable when you look at a map. Simple, logical, brilliant, but maps lie. They flatten reality into neat, digestible shapes, hiding the brutal complexity beneath. Because the Musandam Peninsula is not empty desert waiting to be carved, is part of a mountain range. Towering limestone peaks rise more than 2,000 meters above sea level. Solid rock, immovable, unforgiving, ancient. Building a canal here wouldn't mean dredging sand like in other projects, it would mean slicing through mountains. Entire ridges would need to be blasted apart, excavated, reshaped. The scale of such an operation is almost impossible to comprehend. Millions, no billions of tons of rock would have to be removed, and the canal itself would need to be enormous, capable of accommodating some of the largest ships ever built. These vessels are not just big, they are floating cities of steel, requiring deep, wide, and perfectly stable channels to navigate safely. The engineering challenge alone pushes the limits of what humanity has ever attempted. And then comes the cost, potentially hundreds of billions of dollars, a figure so vast it dwarfs even the most ambitious infrastructure projects in history. And yet, even if money were no object, even if technology could overcome the terrain, there is another barrier far more unpredictable than mountains. Politics, power, control. The Musandam Peninsula belongs to Oman, a nation with its own priorities, its own vision for the future. There is no official plan to carve a canal through its mountains. No agreement, no blueprint, no green light. And a project of this magnitude would require more than just a permission. It would demand unprecedented international cooperation. Governments would need to align. Investors would need to commit staggering sums. Security arrangements would need to guarantee that the canal remains open and protected under all circumstances. Because here's the uncomfortable irony: a canal would not eliminate vulnerability. It would simply move it. Instead of relying on a natural choke point, the world would depend on an artificial one. A single, engineered passage that could still be blocked. A grounded tanker, a targeted strike, even a natural disaster. Any one of these could shut it down instantly. The global economy would not escape risk. It would merely shift it to a new location. And yet, the idea refuses to die. It keeps resurfacing, discussed in quiet rooms, analyzed in reports, imagined in strategic plans, because it represents something deeper than just a construction project. It represents a desire to control fate, to redesign geography itself, to remove the uncertainty that comes with depending on a narrow, fragile corridor shaped by forces beyond human control. But the truth is, geography has always dictated the flow of trade, power, and history. From ancient routes to modern shipping lanes, the world moves along paths defined by nature. And while humanity can reshape the landscape, it cannot erase the risks entirely. For now, the Strait of Hormuz remains exactly what it has always been: a critical artery, a potential flashpoint, a place where the stability of the global economy hangs in delicate balance. And as long as the world continues to rely on it, the question will linger in the background, unanswered and unsettling. What happens if one day, that narrow passage is no longer enough? And if that day ever comes, the consequences won't unfold slowly. They will arrive all at once, like a shockwave moving through a tightly connected system. At first it will look like a headline, a brief alert, a sudden disruption in a place most people have never heard of. But within hours, the ripple effects will begin to spread. Oil markets will react instantly, not with calm analysis but with panic. Prices will surge, not gradually, but violently, spiking in minutes as traders scramble to predict the unknown. Governments will issue statements, carefully worded, trying to project control in a situation where control is slipping away. Shipping companies will halt routes, reroute vessels, and calculate risks in real time. And somewhere out at sea, hundreds of massive tankers will slow down, waiting, not moving forward, not turning back, just waiting in uncertainty, caught in a system that no longer has clear direction. Then the second wave hits. Refineries, which depend on precise and predictable flows of crude oil, begin to feel the strain. Supplies that were expected simply don't arrive. Timelines break down. Storage facilities start to empty faster than they can be replenished. The delicate balance between supply and demand begins to tilt, and when it tilts, it doesn't stop halfway. Fuel prices climb higher, not just for cars, but for everything that depends on transportation. Trucks, ships, planes. Every link in the supply chain begins to tighten. And what started as a disruption in a distant waterway starts to show up in the most ordinary places. A delayed shipment, a price increase, a product that suddenly becomes harder to find. It's subtle at first, almost invisible, but then it accelerates. Airlines begin adjusting routes and cutting flights as fuel costs rise unpredictably. Logistics companies pass those costs down the chain. Businesses, already operating on thin margins, are forced to make decisions, raise prices or absorb losses. And most choose survival. Prices climb. Inflation creeps upward, not as a theory, but as a lived reality. Groceries become more expensive. Transportation costs increase. Entire industries begin to feel the pressure. And for millions of people, the cause remains distant and abstract. They don't